A lot of people dismiss this scene with Moff Gideon because it was just a short scene, nothing was really extracted from it, and there's so much happening in episode 7 that most people just left it by the wayside. But these tanks with people inside them left a lot of the fans puzzled as to what actually is going on. It's easy to just say, oh, it's just how they created Snoke or something like that, but I think there's something deeper to it that not a lot of people went into detail to explain it, and I'm gonna do it in this video. For me, what I've discovered and what I've observed, what I agree with, of course, are 4 very compelling theories that actually make a lot of sense as to what is going on in Moff Gideon's lair. Who are these people, or perhaps even this person? I'm gonna rank them by the most ridiculous, what I think is not true, to what I think is the most probable thing that is actually happening within these cloning tanks. First of all, right off the bat, I'm gonna start with Snoke. So the most obvious reason is, of course, that these cloning facilities at his Mandalore base would be involved in Snoke's creation, as we see the Imperial plan, aka Palpatine's plan, all involves at some point in time Snoke getting created, him trying to rule with the First Order, stuff like that. But the Imperial remnants are working together to presumably go to implement Palpatine's grand plan. However, Darth Sidious was always a few steps ahead of everybody else. Wouldn't it be unlikely that he would have left such an important task in the hands of just one faction of the Empire, just Moff Gideon? He would at least spread out his efforts. As we saw, the Shadow Council comprises of a lot of other important people, namely Hux and Pelion. These are, I think, much more important players, at least for the future, than Moff Gideon, who we don't see in the sequel. Furthermore, in the Darth Vader comics, when he makes it to Exegol for the first time, while Palpatine is explaining his machinations, we can clearly see bacta tanks with Snoke clones inside of them. So for me, I don't think that these people inside these tanks have anything to do with Snoke, but they have perhaps something to do with cloning technology, because even afterwards, when Moff Gideon confronts Bo-Katan and the other Mandalorians, he went on to say that we learn from every civilization, whether that be the Jedi, the cloners, and this is why I think him mentioning the cloners gives you an indication that he and Dr. Pershing definitely had some sort of scheme that involved cloning. This is what I will talk about further in my later guesses, I should say. Now we come to the third one, and that is that Moff Gideon is perhaps creating an army of the undead. I left Snoke fourth because I think that is definitely not what's happening, and I do think this one is interesting, but does not have any value really. There's been rumors for a while that in the Ahsoka show, she might end up facing an army of undead stormtroopers, and it's possible that Moff Gideon may have some hand in creating them. As we've seen, Ahsoka will mostly deal with Grand Admiral Thrawn's return, and now even Dark Jedi perhaps, but even though Ahsoka has to deal with Thrawn, we now learn through the Shadow Council that Moff Gideon and Thrawn are somehow connected. Their story is not completely separate. Perhaps what Gideon is creating in those tanks aren't clones at all, but something more perverse, a way to test whether the dead can be brought back to life. This again goes perfectly in line with Palpatine. While he was obsessed with cloning, he was also obsessed with eternal life, defeating death. As I said, I don't think this is happening, but it kind of makes sense if you dive deep into it. Now we come to the second possibility, and the second and the first possibility, I should tell you, are the most realistic. So the second one for me, Moff Gideon's clone tanks on Mandalore contain clones of himself. Remember what I said, Moff Gideon went out of his way to thank not only the Jedi civilization, which gave wisdom, but also the cloners, probably meaning the Kaminoans. What did the Kaminoans do but replicate Jango Fett 100,000 times? One host, virtually unlimited clones. If you look at these tanks very closely, these two people that we see in the tanks are not that dissimilar. They are in fact very, very similar in build and in stature. Furthermore, their head shape kinda resembles Moff Gideon's. He went on to taunt Din Djarin and Bo-Katan about their resources, saying, "Thanks to your planet's rich resources, I have created the next generation Dark Trooper suit forged from Beskar alloy, and the most impressive improvement is that it has me in it. This line led many to speculate that since Moff Gideon has this new Dark Trooper armor and he specifically is wearing it, this means that the same design could be used for his clones too that are inside these tanks being created. This means even if the New Republic defeats him or the Mandalorians defeat him, he has essentially built an Imperial operation in secret and can be duplicated many a time, similar to Jango Fett's army. Outside of Thrawn, we can kind of deduce that Gideon is the most pragmatic out of other Imperials, and he knows this. Furthermore, he is an idealist. Why wouldn't he want clones of himself? Similar to Palpatine, he wants his legacy to live on. He wants his work not to go unnoticed. These are the delusions of grandeur of these grand villains. They want to be remembered in history. But the one that defeats even possibility number 2 is, of course, possibility number 1, which is the most realistic one. Moff Gideon wants to create the perfect stormtrooper. In episode 7, we saw the introduction of these new soldiers wearing Beskar armor. Their armor was extremely similar to a stormtrooper with some clothing and red LEDs. To me, it's a cross between a stormtrooper and a dark trooper, but as you can see, their armor, similar to the clones, bears a striking resemblance to Mandalorian armor. Moff Gideon even says, "You were talented people," talking to Bo-Katan, "but your time has passed. However, as you can see, Mandalore will live on in me." So he's obsessed with wiping out the Mandalorians and obsessed with taking their place and their resources and even knowledge. Since his last defeat, he's used the planet's Beskar alloy to give his troopers a new version of Mandalorian armor, and Moff Gideon has went on to create a suit for himself as well. Moff Gideon could be creating his own Imperial army, one that even the Shadow Council and Palpatine himself might not know about. What better way than by breeding new soldiers through, of course, cloning? This is what the video is about. Who are those people inside those tanks? Remember, before we see those tanks, we see these soldiers standing there literally like droids, inactive. This gives you a hint that these are not real quote-unquote people, but are submissive clones that Moff Gideon has created through his cloning process to breed a new type of soldier that will act on command, basically hypnotized MK Ultra troopers. This is, I think, the most realistic explanation as to what is inside those tanks. They are clones that were genetically manipulated to completely obey Moff Gideon's orders. When the cloning process is finished, he will give them this Beskar armor, and they will effectually be same as the Dark Troopers with Beskar alloy, Beskar armor, but now will have the capabilities, intelligence, and dexterity of a human. We essentially have come to the same problem that divided the Separatist army and the Republic army. While the Separatists had a vastly bigger army than the Republic's, they were droids, clankers. They had their limitations, while the Republic had versatile and agile clones, smart quote-unquote humans that could do the job better than 10, 20 droids at a time. This is what Moff Gideon has understood. However much he loved his Dark Troopers, they had their limitations in being droids. But now with these new Beskar clones, he could do a lot more in a very short amount of time. So these are essentially the 4 possibilities of who is inside those tanks. Let me know if you agree with any of them, with none of them. I'd love to know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, leave a thumbs up down below, subscribe for dailies. Now you have an awesome day, Star Wars fans. I'll see you in the next video, and may the Force be with you. Until then.